Hey guys, welcome to another tutorial today, and this is going to be the tutorial for my free asset which I put on the Unity store, which is the free survival UI for Unity. Now we're going to look at creating the UI today and the scripting behind it. You can download it from the Unity Asset Store. I will put the link in the description so you can get hold of the specific UI elements, which include the little sprites included in my pack, or you can create these separately. I won't be specifically showing you how to create these because they are available, but they're just literally a selection of basic sprites, and I'll mention as I go along what I did. To get started, what we'll do is we'll start by creating the UI. So as I've made it in my little asset, it's just a circle sort of thing in the corner. So what we'll start off by doing is right clicking in the hierarchy, going UI and just choosing image. We'll go to 2D mode and I will just focus in on the image that we've got. And now you can see my canvas here, it's already defaulted to this bottom corner. Now what we can do is we can just add my circle sprite here. So all you can see is this is just a circle sprite, which is a 512 by 512 text gen. I've just converted it to a 2D UI sprite, so we can add this to the source image slot and we just get the image down at the bottom. What I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe scale this up to 275 by 275 just so that it's even, and as you can see in our game view down here we've got it like this, and we'll just put it towards the corner here, and that looks like a reasonable size. We'll go back on our canvas before we start and just put the size to scale with screen size, and we'll set that to 1920 by 1080 because that's the resolution of my current game, and it'll just scale it up from there because it's a good place to start. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this to the stamina UI. So that's the thing that it's going to do, and what I like to do in this case is I will turn this to an orange because this orange is going to be our stamina. You can set this to however you like. And then what we can do is we can untick that it's not going to be a raycast target, and we'll set this image type to, we'll set it to filled. So then we can affect the different effects that are built into Unity to how it transforms the image for us. So what we can do in this case is we can just set it to vertical, and we can set the fill origin to bottom, and it's just on a value of 1. So as you can see, so we'll program it so when we use up some stamina it'll go down like so while we get to a 0 object. So that's perfect. That's exactly how we wanted to start. Now what we can do is we can right click on our canvas, go UI, and we can just choose another image. And what we'll do is this time we'll set and we'll add the human sprite, and we'll just add it the same way, and this is just a 256 by 512 human sprite that I've made, and you can get that from the pack. What we can do is I'm going to scale this to a 128 width by 256, so we get something like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it down because you can see it just about fits in our little circle nicely. I'm just going to position it into the center because you can see the guiding lines that are there. That's perfect how we want. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set this one to red because this will be the actual image that is behind our normal health, which will decrease. So we'll just call this health UI, and I'll say _red, and we can untick that it's not going to be a raycast tag, and this is just going to be simple. Then what we can do with this one is we can duplicate it and we can rename it to UI health green. So this will be the thing that's over the top of our red one. You can't see it now because they're both red, and with it being below it in the stack on the canvas, we can set this now to a green, and you can see that it's now over the top. And like we did with our circle, we can select the drop down, choose filled, and then we can set it to vertical again and choose bottom, and exactly like so, you can see that it looks like we're just, all we're doing is getting rid of the green one, and it looks like we're revealing the red one there, and it's just a little trick because they're in exactly the same place, so it's perfect. One last thing that we want to do is we want to do the actual core vitals that for in our pack. So we go UI again. Well, yeah, again, as you can imagine, we're going to use an image again, and we're just going to call this, I'm going to call this hunger, and I'll just call it the left. So this is going to be our left bar. And then what I'm going to add is I'm going to add my sprite circle hollow left, and all it is a cutout like so, which is just as we would expect. I'm just going to add this to, I'm just going to do this as 292 by 292, and we will get it, and you can place it at the center of the object like so, and it looks like it's in the very center of the thing that we're going to use. And then in this case, yet again, we'll untick it. We want untick raycast target. We'll set another colour, and for this one I'll just have it as a pinky purple, something like that. You can have these as whatever you want, like I said. You can set this one again to filled, and this one is going to be a radial 180 because literally this is only 180 instead of it being a vertical or horizontal. And then we're going to set this to a right hand movement, and we're going to keep on the clockwise movement, and you can see that it ticks down perfectly as we wanted. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that and call this first right. We can just leave that there, and we can add the actual sprite, which is the hollow right, and you can see that it fits perfectly there. And we can leave it unfilled. We can change the color, and we'll change this to a blue because it makes sense as blue to be first, like so. And then you can see that if we tick down there, it does something really weird that we don't want it to do because it's on 180 radial right. So we actually need it to be a radial left, and when we do it, it does it the opposite way, and you think, oh no, why is it going the wrong way? You just want to untick clockwise, and then it will do it the opposite way as we would expect. So in this case, we've literally got our UI set up just like so, and you can, customize this however you want, but this is just the base for creating it. Okay, so the next bit is going to be actually looking to add the script to make it work. So when we pick up the objects, we're going to do something. So I'm going to be using the standard FPS controller from the standard assets, and this is going to be something that we customize, and make sure that if you customize it however you like, you want to make sure that you don't re-import the FPS controller or something, because it will overwrite what you've just done. So you can open this up in Visual Studio, and then we're specifically going to create two scripts. So we're going to have one script which is going to control the actual survival controls or the UI itself. So I'll call this survival UI controller, and then we'll have another script and we'll call this the pickup controller, because the things that we're going to be able to pick up. So what we'll do is I'll just get rid of the first starting methods here, and what we'll do is we'll create a new namespace to just hide everything in. And we'll just create this as this is just going to be the survival UI system, for instance. And we'll just keep it like so. And then I'll just drop this section down, and I will have this like so. And I'm just going to copy the namespace into my survival UI part, and I will do the same, just so we encapsulate it so it's all together and we don't get any clashing with other scripts. So we'll go to the survival UI controller for now. And what we're going to do at the top, we're going to need to use some more namespaces. So we're going to need to use using the Unity engine.ui with a semicolon, and then we're going to also say using Unity standard assets.characters.firstperson. And they're the two things that we want to start by using. So we're going to start by creating a bunch of variables which can hold all the things that we want to do. So I'll add some headers and things in this script, but I won't tell you what I'm adding. It's just to make it neater as we're going along. So I'm just going to make it neat like so. And we'll have first a public float, and we'll call this the player's health. Then we're going to add in square brackets serialized field, and we're going to have a private float and call this the max health that we can possibly have at any one time. I'm going to copy the header that I've got and have this as just the stamina controls, so that when we have it in the inspector it's much nicer to look at. So again, we'll have a public float, and we'll call this the player's stamina, and have another public float and call this the max stamina with a semicolon. And then we're going to have a few serialized fields because we don't need to actually make these public. Private flow, and we'll have this as stamina drain, so how quickly the stamina is going to drain. And then we'll have another private flow, and we'll call this stamina regen with a semicolon, so this is how fast the stamina will regenerate. And then another serialized field, private float, and we'll call this the jump cost, and it's how much it's going to cost us to jump. So all these are slightly different values because the player stamina will take into account of sprinting and jumping at the same time. So that's perfect. We'll add another header, and we'll call this the thirst controls, and as you can see, we're just controlling the different things that we're going to have. So as you can imagine, we'll have another serialized field private float, and we'll have this as player thirst. Then we'll have another serialized field private float, and we'll have this as max thirst, and one last one is private float, and then the thirst drain. So obviously how quickly we do that. And I'm just going to add these automatically because they're just similar to the ones above as player hunger, max hunger and hunger drain. Then we're going to have a section, then we're going to have a section specifically around hunger and thirst specific damage controls. So what this means is how much we're going to damage the player's health based on when the hunger or the thirst, or if the hunger and thirst together are both low, and they're going to damage the health. So we'll have another serialized field and we'll say private integer, and then we'll say that the damage multiplier for that. Then we'll add a serialized field and we'll say private float hunger damage rate, and again we'll have a serialized field and say private float thirst damage rate. And then last but not least is we need to create some references to the things that we're going to use within the script. So we'll have these just set to references, and again we're going to have a serialized field and we're going to say private, and then we'll set this to first person controller, and we needed the using FPS controller at the top as the namespace so we could access it, and we're just going to specify this as our player. We're going to have another serialized field and we'll say that private image, and we're going to have this set to the health image because we need to reference all our different UI elements. We'll have another private image and we'll call this the stamina image. We'll have another, which as you can imagine, private image hunger image, and serialized field private image as thirst image. And then one last one is what I'm going to have is the hide in inspector, because we don't need to see this one in inspector because it's more of a debug, and we'll call this public bool, and then we are sprinting because we're going to need to check whether we're actually sprinting or not at any time. So I know this was probably felt quite long-winded, but we just needed to get our variables set up for the different ones that we're going to require. So this is about specifically if we do pickups, we're going to update something. So we'll have this as a public void, and we'll just call this update the vitals. And we will have inside brackets, we're going to set some parameters. So we're going to specify that, because from another script we can specify specifically, we can call this method and we can specify some values for the parameters so we can make this slightly easier and more streamlined. So I'll have a string and I'll just call this the vital type, and I'll add a comma and I'll put integer value, and then we'll add two curly brackets below. And then in this case we'll say that if the vital type is equal to, and we'll specify a string and we'll say hunger. So this is going to be if the vital type, so if one of the things that we pick up is going to be saying that it's the hunger type of object, we're going to say that the player's hunger plus equals the value that we're going to specify based on the method that we call. So this plus equal just means it's going to add to the value without us specifically saying player value equals the player value plus the value. It's just a shorthand way of writing it. Then below here we also need to check if it's the player hunger is ever above a specific amount. So we're going to check in here, then we'll say that if the player hunger is greater than or equal to the max hunger as we specified, because we never want it to go below, we never want it to go above, we'll say that player hunger is equal to the maximum hunger with a semicolon. So that's perfect there. We've checked to see if it's the hunger type. We'll do exactly the same below, and below these two brackets which encapsulate the hunger, I'm just going to paste in if the vital type is equal to the thirst. We'll say that the player thirst plus equals that value, and we check to see if the player thirst is something. So that's perfect. It's exactly the same, except we've just swapped the variables around. For instead of player hunger, it's player thirst. And then what I've done here is I've also just created a variable, a vital type, which is classed as normal. So here I've just added a vital type which is normal, and all normal does is it'll have the hunger image dot fill amount. So in our UI, we've got the images, and we can specify, because we've got the namespace for the UIs, from these images, they've got the fill amount. You know, when I adjusted the bar, that fill amount is based on a value of 1 to 0 or 0 to 1. Now, because player hunger and max hunger can be bigger values than 1, we need to make it a decimal place value. So if we do the player hunger divided by the maximum hunger, we always get a decimal placed value between 0 and 1. So in this case, if we just call this and we said that it's a normal value that we're going to call, we're just going to literally update our hunger and thirst vitals based on what our current values are. So this is just a call that if we need to update our UIs separately to these, we can just call that, and just to make things a lot easier. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create another method which is extremely similar to this, and I'm going to put it above here. So we're going to say that public void update health. So in this case, I'm going to have a different method which controls updating the health. So we're going to have another string type, so some more parameters which are called health item type, and we're going to have a comma, and we're going to call this integer value. This is just to keep everything nice and concise, as concise as we can be. And then we'll say in this case that if health item type is equal to, we'll say in this case no vitals. I'll specify this as we go along. We'll say that if the player health is greater than 0, then the player health minus equals the value divided by, and we can start in quotes, is the hunger damage rate plus the thirst damage rate with a semicolon on the end. And then we can say the health image dot fill amount equals the player health divided by the max health. So in this case, it means that if we're specifying that when we call it later on that we've got no vitals, so that means that if hunger and thirst are both equal to 0, but the player's health is greater than 0, we need to start doing damage based on the rate that we've set for the hunger and the thirst amount together, and start taking that away from the value that we specify from the player's health, and then we're just updating the UI accordingly to the current player's health divided by the player's health. So it's just a way that we can, like I say, if they equal 0, we're going to do extra damage. So now here, below here, what we're going to do is going to create another if statement, and then we'll say that if the health item type is equal to just damage this time, then we were going to say that if we also always need to check if the player's health is above 0 to actually do this sort of thing, because if we're already dead or at 0, we don't want to do anything else. So then we'll say that the player's health is minus equal the value that we specify, because we just specify it from another script. And again, we can call this line of code, which is just the health image. We could specify that as being our own method in this case, and it would just stop us having to write this line, but we'll just leave it like so for now. And similarly below there, what we can also do is we can also create another type, which is if the health is equal, so it's going to be a heal object, we'll check if the health is greater than or equal to 0. Then we'll say that the player health plus equals that, and then in this case, when we get healed, we also need to check if the player health is greater than the max health at any point, and we just set them to the maximum if that's the case, so we can never go over that amount if we get healed. So if we get healed and we're at 99 health and we can only have the maximum of 100, we would only ever stick at 100, we wouldn't go further. But in the damage script, we also want to, just like we did here, if we check if we're above, if we take damage, and we can say that if the player health is ever less than or equal to 0, then what we'll do is we'll add 2 curly brackets and we'll just call a method called death, and death can be its own method just at the bottom because it's not very important in this, and it can just be down here, and we'll just have a debug.log line which is you died. So like I said, if we're healed, we need to check if we're above a value. If we take damage, we need to check, have we received too much damage? Because if this is the only way that we receive damage, it's potentially the only way that we're going to die, other than if our health is ever below a specific value when the vitals hit the bottom. So now we need to create the bits which control the stamina and how they update. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add those above here, and we're going to say, similar to before, public void, and then we're going to say that update the stamina. And again, we're going to create a string which is called the stamina item type, and have that as a comma and integer value. And then say below, then we'll say that if stamina item type is equal to stamina update, then below here we will just say that the stamina image dot fill amount equals the player stamina divided by the maximum stamina with a semicolon. Just need to make sure that I have a ending quote there and the end bracket as so. Then what we'll do, that we'll say that if the stamina item type is equal to a stamina item that we're going to pick up, but we need to make sure that the stamina item is in quotes because that just specified it for me. So I will put these in 2 capitals so it's slightly different. Then just as we did before, as you can expect, we'll say that player stamina plus equals the value, and then we'll update the actual stamina value. But we also need to check if the stamina is ever above the specific value, just like we did on the health. We'll say that if stamina is ever above the maximum stamina that we can have, we'll just set it to the normal amount. So then we're going to create another public method at the top. So we'll say that it's public void, then we're going to call this stamina jump. But in this case, we're going to not set any parameters, and we're just going to say that player stamina minus equals the jump cost with a semicolon, and then we're going to say update stamina, and then in brackets here we'll just say that the stamina update is the thing that we want to call because we just want to update the actual stamina when we jump. We want to just update the UI. But in this case, we needed to specify the actual string itself, and we need to specify a value. So when we use up the stamina, we just want to put a value of 0 in here and then add a semicolon, because we're just calling this to update the actual UI rather than actually doing anything to it. So we can just have a value of 0 to do that. We need one other method to control whether we're not sprinting. So I need a public void sprinting with 2 brackets and then 2 curly brackets below. And we'll say that we had this variable, so we are sprinting is equal to true. So if we're sprinting, we're going to be setting it equal to true. And then if we say that player stamina minus equals the time dot delta time times by the stamina drain, so how much the stamina is going to drain over time. So again, we're going to call update stamina just like this line here, and it's just let us shorthand it to call this method, and we're going to specify just to update the image that we've got. So this is perfect now, and I will go through all this as we go along. We need one more method to control, because as these do it, because especially with this time.delta time, it's something that needs to be done in real time. So when we're using the stamina, it'll be when we're pressing a key. So we need to do it in an update method. I've just written these in their own methods because we only need to update them, most of them, when we specify, like the thirst and the hunger and the thirst only need to be updated when we pick something up, and the damage only needs to be done to the health when we take damage, and also with the stamina only needs to be updated when we specify. So we can say private void update in this case, and then 2 curly brackets below, and then we'll say that if when we are sprinting is false. So if we're not sprinting at any point, then we'll say that if the player stamina is less than or equal to the max stamina, then we'll have 2 curly brackets below there, and then say that player stamina plus equals the time.delta time times by the stamina regen. So if at any point when we're not sprinting, we're going to be calling this all the time because we need to update the actual stamina itself. So we can call this, and then all we want to do is update the UI again. So we can call our method update stamina. We need to specify which type it is, so it's the stamina update, and we don't need to specify a value because we're just literally updating the UI itself. So this is perfect now. Then that's perfect for sprinting. So now in this case, we need to update so when we do damage to our specific hunger and thirst amounts, so that we're going to check that if the player health is greater than or equal to 0, then what we'll do is that we'll say that if the player hunger is greater than or equal to 0, then we will do that the player hunger minus equals the time.delta time times by the hunger drain. And then below here we'll just write a quick else statement, and we'll say that if it's not above that, we'll say that we need to update the health, and we need to specify that we've got no vitals, and we need to put the damage multiplier, which is the value of damage that we need to do, and it's added an extra semicolon there to me. We can do similar below here, and as it's talking about an if statement here, we'll say that if the player thirst is greater than or equal to 0, then we need to tick down the thirst based on the thirst drain amount, and then if not, we need to say that we've got no vitals in this case, and we'll just do damage by a damage multiplier. And then if none of this is applicable, we just need to, when any of these cases is applicable, we just need to update the vitals, and we need to call normal, which will just update our UIs, and we can just specify that as 0, because if I just click on update UI, and if I update vitals, and you see at the bottom we've got specified normal, which is just updating the player's hunger and thirst images on the UIs. So now that's everything set up, and there is some ways that we could make this slightly more refined, and you can tweak this as you need to, but I'm trying to breeze through this as quick as humanly possible because it's going to be ended up quite long. So now we're going to go to our pickup script, and we're going to be able to pick up some objects to do things. So in this case, we're going to create an enum to be able to create the different types of objects that we're going to have. So we'll have square brackets serialized field, and we'll have private integer, and then we're going to specify an item value. So what's the value of the item going to be worth on the value that health that it gives back, or the thirst that it gives back. Then we'll have another serialized field and call this private, and then I'm going to specify this as a pickup type with 2 capitals, because this is going to be my enum, and then have that specified as my pickups. Then we're going to have a serialized field, and we're going to say private, and then we're going to say survival UI controller, and we're going to specify this as the UI controller that we're going to use, and you need to make sure that it's in the same namespace or we're going to have a problem. Then just below here, not inside anything else yet, we're just going to create a public enum, and we're going to say this and set it as pickup type, and then have the 2 curly brackets below there, and you can see that now this pickup type is specified. So we can start by writing none, put a comma, we'll set a new line, and we can call this a damage object, we can call one a health object, we can call another a hunger object, we can call another a thirst object, and then we can call one a stamina object. But we don't need a comma at the bottom of the last one. So these are going to be our different types of objects. So now in this case, we're just going to use a trigger event. So when we walk into them, it's going to do the thing. So we'll say that on trigger enter, and then in brackets we'll say collider other. Then we're going to specify that if my pickups is equal to the pickup type dot, and in this case we'll just use heal object, and then we're going to have 2 brackets below, and we're going to specify some things in here. So we're going to say that the UI controller that we want to access, so that's our other script, and then we want to say that we wanted to update the health, didn't we, with a heal object. Then we're going to specify the string that we wanted, because it was going to be, so if I go here and update health, we need to add a string and a value, and we could have heal, damage, or no vitals. So in this case, we're just going to specify it's heal. And then in this case we needed to specify an integer, so we can just specify item value, which was the value at the top of our variable of this script, which means that it'll update exactly. And now in this case we'll just say that this.gameObject.setActive in brackets false, so when we walk into it, it's going to be equal to nothing. So in this case, with all our different objects, we're going to just paste them in and just change the specific values. So for damage, we're going to have this one as the pickup type of damage object. We'll access the UI controller. We're going to update the health, and in this case, we'll say that we're going to choose and write damage. So that's it. We can leave the item value specified in this script. We're going to also create another if statement, and we'll call this one the hunger object. And in this case, we need to, instead of updating health, we need to update the vitals. So in this case, we need to specify the value, which is hunger in the string, and we can keep it exactly the same as we did. Copy again, paste below. We'll say, as you expect, a thirst object. We can specify thirst because we'd already set it up in our previous script to make life easier. And then one last time, we need to make sure that we have a stamina object, and we set this to stamina item, and it's perfect and should be ready to go. We can quickly go back into Unity for a second now, empty game object, and we can just reset the transforms, and we can call this the survival UI controller. We can add our survival UI controller to that slot. You can see we've got everything set out in the inspector as we expected, and I've got a bunch of cubes here to represent my different objects. So what I'll do is I'll select each one that I've got, and I'm just going to drag my pickup controller to each one. And then you can see that depending on which cube it is, so we can see that this one was my damage cube, and I'll specify that on my pickups, we've got this damage cube as it's a damage object. We need to specify the survival UI controller, and we're going to specify that we're going to do a value of 20 damage when we walk into that. Again, this one, do exactly the same, add it, specify that it's going to be a heal object, and we'll heal health by 10. And I will add this to every single one, and because you don't need to see me selecting that now this one's a thirst object, I know I'll come back and make sure that on these objects they have a tick of their is trigger when on their box collider, if you've got that, and your player actually has a tag of player when we walk into them. So what we can actually do now is go to the survival controller. We can specify that the player's health should be on 100 to start, maximum is 100. We'll say that the player stamina is 100, maximum is 100. We'll say that the stamina drain is 10, stamina regen can be 1, the jump cost can be 25, the player's thirst 100, max thirst is 100, stamina drain, thirst drain is 0.5, player's hunger 100, 100, hunger drain can be 1, then damage multiplier can be 1, then the hunger damage rate can be 100, the other one can be 75. And then we need to add our player into this, add our player like so. Stamina image, we'll add our health green, which is going to be the one that moves down. We'll have the hunger, and we'll have the thirst. And then we can see that our bars are falling down themselves normally. We can enter this object, and you can see that we took damage to our health. We can walk into the green, and it gave us some health back. We can walk into this object, and it gave us our water. We can walk into the next one, it gave us some hunger. But we can't do anything yet. We can't run and sprint or do anything because when I collect this object, it won't do anything because it's already the maximum. We just need to edit the first person controller script, and we can do some small tweaks because we don't want to do it in our other script. We want to specifically change this one. So in here, what we need to do is we need to specify that in here, we can see that we've got a variable called isWalking. We want to set that isWalking. We want to set, instead of it having a serialized field and private, we'll set that to public. We also want to set that the jump down here, we'll set that one to public because we need to see when we're jumping or not. And then we need to set the other one down here, which is the private _jumping. We can set that equal to public too. And what I'm going to do just here is I'm going to create my own variable, and it's going to be serialized field, square brackets, and we're going to specify private, and I'm just going to have this as my survival UI system, and then I'm just going to put _survival controller. But you can see this, it specifies that it doesn't exist in this, I don't have access to this namespace. So what we can do at the top is we can say that using survival system UI, we have to set this to actual survival UI controller. That's the script. We've specified the variable, and we're using the namespace up at the top that we need to access. So if we scroll on down to the fix update, and then we'll get to a part which is line 120, which is the inside the character controller to check whether it's grounded and whether we're moving in a Y direction and whether we're actually specifically jumping or not. What we need to do in this if statement, which it says m_jump, we need to say and we'll say that m_survival controller dot player stamina is ever greater than or equal to the, in brackets, m_survival controller dot max stamina times by 20 divided by 100 and add another bracket on the end. So what this is saying, that if we are actually jumping, is ever greater than or equal the maximum stamina times by the 20 that we're going to do, which it costs us to jump, divided by the maximum value, which was 100. And then in here, when we're actually it's specifying about the jump speed, we need to say m_survival controller dot stamina jump. So we're just calling that method. And now if we go down to line 207, and it's talking about the input for the movement of the character or the other things that we have, it's talking about the left shift that we're going to press to sprint. What we're going to do is below this end if, we're going to write a new if statement and call this if m_is walking, which is in this script. Then we're going to specify that m_survival controller dot we are sprinting equals false, because if we're walking, we're obviously not sprinting. And then below here, we're going to specify another if statement if m what is walking, so if we're not walking, and the m_character controller dot velocity dot square magnitude is greater than 0, then we'll add 2 curly brackets below, and then we'll say that if m_survival controller dot player stamina is ever greater than 0, then we'll close that up and we'll say below there that m_survival controller dot we are sprinting equals true, and m_survival controller dot sprinting with a 2 brackets and a semicolon. Then we'll have an else statement which will say that m_is walking is equal to true with a semicolon, and I'll just get rid of that because Visual Studio always makes me do that. So what we're specifying here is that we're saying that if we are walking, we obviously can't be sprinting, so we're not going to do any of the updates to our stamina. But in the other case, there's if we're not walking and then the velocity is greater than 0, so we must be sprinting because we're moving, but we're not walking, so therefore we're sprinting. We're going to say that if the player stamina is greater than 0, then we can say we're specifying yes, we're sprinting, so we'll do the update function in our script over here. So they say that yes, we are sprinting now, so we're going to adjust so we're going to say that sprinting, so we are sprinting is true, and we call the method, which we do in there, we call the method below. We'll say that we're definitely sprinting, so we're going to take away from the stamina, and then in any other case, m walking equals true, so we're back to walking again, so we're just making those checks to make things easier. You can go to our player object and you can see that it needs the survival controller there, and now if we press play, and you can see that everything's ticking down normally, we can walk around, nothing's happening, we can press space and we'll jump and it will take something off our stamina. Then if I jump, I can press space to do it. If I hold shift, then it's actually going to turn down our stamina. And also if stamina equals 0, then we're going to have no stamina at all, and then it will take some time to replenish, and only when we've got stamina can we do it. And we also can't jump if we're below 20% of our current stamina. So as you can see, we've got the trappings to our very start of our survival system, and you can see it as so, and we can take all the damage and do everything we need to from here. So you can see that based on some simple scripts, some simple checks, and editing the first person controller, we can do that and get the very start. Obviously there's optimizations you can make, things you can change, things you can do over time, but be sure to check this asset out and all my other great assets on the store. Be sure to check out my Discord. Give me any feedback in here. If you don't like some of the code, by all means, let me know. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Cheers.